Bonjour and welcome to Paris. I'm sitting with my friend John Baxter, author of 40 or 50 books, ranging from science fiction to film to memoir, and particularly about Paris. John, when he began in Australia as an adolescent, was a big fan of science fiction and wrote many magazine articles and was published as an adolescent. And from that, he segued into the film business, where he wrote perhaps 20 biographies of famous filmmakers, including Stanley Kubrick, actors like Robert De Niro, Federico Fellini, Woody Allen, and so forth. And John, before you started writing about Paris, you stopped writing about film. Is it because, if we were to paraphrase the wonderful Gloria Swanson, the personalities got smaller?
No, well, there's something in that, actually, yes. I ran through all the people that I really admired. I started out looking for people about whom there was a kind of mystery. I didn't know enough about him, and not enough was known about these people. Like Fellini, for instance, there were books in Italian, but not many in English. So I wrote a biography, which happily I was able to meet him, and he helped me with and endorsed. So then I continued with that. I did Louis Buñuel, I did George Lucas, all people who had some kind of a secret, some sort of a mystery about them. Kubrick, of course, very obviously a very secretive filmmaker. But yeah, I got finally to Robert De Niro, the most secretive of all actors. I thought, who is there left? Who is there who has that kind of charisma, that sort of the darkness to his character? So I thought, well, it has to be me. I'll start writing about myself.
Well, and before you segued into this career as perhaps the most important contemporary chronicler of Paris life, you drew on your experiences as a book collector. And beginning with Istanbul Express, and now you've built this enormously large multi-warehouse collection of rare books, including the first edition of The Great Gatsby, which I won't tell you where to find, but it's somewhere here in Paris, and I know the secret to finding it. But I really love this book as the interregnum, because as a bibliophile myself, and somewhat like you, neither one of us were stained by too much formal education.
True.
We learned through reading. So talk about the pleasures of reading in this book.
Well, you know, bibliophily is the hobby of the solitary. You can go to bookshops and look for books, spend days, months, years doing that, which I did as you say, as an adolescent in Australia, and particularly with science fiction, because I'd been a science fiction writer, so I collected a large number of science fiction books. And then I got into literature and first editions, and back then there were so many second-hand bookshops that you could go into almost any of them and find something, one or two things. So very quickly I built up a huge collection, which has turned out to be extremely valuable. You've mentioned The Great Gatsby, the Scribner first edition. When I bought it in San Luis Obispo in the 60s, I bought it for $500. It wasn't really rated very much then. Now it's worth $100,000, $150,000. The same with many other Hemingway, Fitzgerald books and so on. And then since I came to Paris, I've concentrated on books published in Paris between the wars, which is another interesting area. So the disease of the sweet sickness, as somebody called it, of collecting books is once it gets into your blood, it's incurable.
It also seems that you've followed your passions. The writers and the books that you've collected are things that you were personally passionate about. It wasn't a business enterprise.
Oh no,
you found what you loved, and the money followed.
Yeah, you can't collect books as a business thing. It has to come out of real enthusiasm, out of real love. Because why else would you spend that much time on your hands and knees in these dusty shops? But if you have a sense, if you have that knack, you will accumulate a collection that is valuable, more or less by accident, and that's been the case with me. Collecting books published in Paris between the wars when I collected them, the early books of people who later became famous, Henry Miller, writers like that. Now they're hugely valuable. Back then you could pick them up for 10 francs.
Talking about Marie-Dominique and the lovely Louise.
The lovely Louise, yes. I was very fortunate. I was living in Los Angeles, and I was reminded in various complicated ways of a French lady whom I'd known some years before, and I was seized with the need to make contact with her again. And when I did, it turned out that she was sympathetic towards me as I was towards her. And so, to cut a long story short, I sold up everything I had in Los Angeles and moved to Paris shortly after Louise appeared on the scene. And I've been here now for 26 years, almost 27 years. And who knew that this would prove to be the perfect city for me? I'd never had any ambitions to live in France. I didn't speak French. I didn't really have any particular knowledge of France, but in a way maybe that's driven my writing about it, because my ignorance is such that I need to remedy this, and the best way to do that is to write a book. So when I did We'll Always Have Paris, I thought, okay, my story is a love story. Maybe I should write about other love stories of Paris. And so I wrote about, having a baby in Paris, not me personally.
Right.
But
You participated.
I was there, I was present. And then also about becoming a family man in Paris, cooking, because I found that I'd married into a family where no one cooked. They were all professors, painters, artists, journalists. None of them could cook. So as I loved to cook, I by default became the family cook, and wrote a book then about cooking Christmas dinner for my family, and so on and so on and so on. Each book more or less suggested the next one.
And probably the biggest selling book you've ever had, The Most Beautiful Walk in the World, about the daily flânerie, if you will, in France. And I happen to know that somebody helped you put this idea together. I mean, someone,
Well, I can't think who you're referring to. No, it's true that you were a contributor to my Paris books, even if only as somebody about whom I can write a Paris character, a boulevardier, as I describe you in my latest book. Yes, the idea of writing about walking around Paris came from the fact that you suggested that maybe visitors to Paris might find it exciting to walk around Paris with a writer. And I said, well, no one would want to pay for that. And you said, no, they pay quite a bit.
But I think, if I can distinguish what you're doing and to some degree what I'm doing, is we're not really tour guides in the traditional sense. Trying to create an experience. As Proust said, you don't need fresh eyes, you need to see things in a fresh way. And I think that all too often, Anglos, Americans, Brits, Australians, tend to see the world from ground level or in their automobile, and don't look up. There's this beautiful atelier, the glass that we're looking at in this La Serre, and miss so much that is available to them. And I think that what you do in your walk is to teach them how to do that.
Yeah, that's what I make the point in the book, that it's not a guidebook, it's like an anti-guidebook. Don't go to just this historic site. Look at the buildings on either side. Maybe they're more interesting than the house where Balzac lived or James George wrote or something. And look up, as you say, the ground floor is a shop, but look up there, look at those offices, those apartments, who lived there. And from that I found that people respond with great enthusiasm. Well, who wants to do that? Whereas I never take more than 4 or 5 people. I sort of respond with them personally. I invite them for lunch afterwards in our apartment, which is in the building where Sylvia Beach lived when she ran the Shakespeare and Company bookshop. And so they have, what tourists mostly see is closed doors. Here's a door that it's open to them. And people have responded, it's astonishing how many people sign up for these walks, because it isn't something that's offered by anybody else.
Boy, I think that what occurs, I think you and I are in the memory business, we're not in the tourism business. Anyone can tell you boom, 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 boom. But hopefully after spending a day with you, they go back to Kansas, Chicago, and they have wonderful stories to tell about what they pick up a copy of your book, or hopefully they rest it on the coffee table to sell some more copies, and but I was in Paris with John, and we had, that's what Paris is all about. Paris is a dream. It's memories waiting to happen. You've moved into a new section, writing about very specific neighborhoods. You've done Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which everyone comes to. You've just done Montmartre, and we recently did an event up in Montmartre in conjunction with this book. And coming up on Montparnasse, which is so it seems that you have 15 more to go. So I suspect you have enough years left to write for the next 15.
I don't know if I want to do a book about every arrondissement, but there are certain areas that are more interesting than others, and of course Saint-Germain, Montmartre, and Montparnasse are the three obvious ones. There's the Marais and there's Opera. After that, I'd be scratching a bit, I think. But yes, it was an idea, in fact, of my editor at HarperCollins, and he said people. They quite like your general books about Paris, but what about focusing on specific areas? And it's worked out very well.
Well, the latest book, Eating Eternity, it's out or it's coming soon?
Coming soon, August.
In August. But you actually incorporate, three of your passions: writing, eating, and a wonderful collection of images that you've culled. John has a phenomenal collection of antique photographs, or certainly knows where to find everything that's quite interesting. And each one of these chapters is dealing with, for example, you might talk about the Franco-Prussian War. There's a big exhibit going on right now at the Invalides. A typical menu in Paris in 1870 during the siege. Would you describe that?
Well, yes, during the siege, of course, the Prussians cut off Paris from all sources of food, so they had to eat what they could. So they started out eating all the horses, then they got to the dogs and cats, then the rats, and then finally, when the people running the zoo could no longer feed their animals, they put the animals up for sale as livestock, and so these were bought by various butchers, and the meat turned up in various great restaurants. You could get boudin noir made with elephant's blood. You could have kangaroo. You could have bear, and so on. The one animal they could not find a way to cook was the hippopotamus, because no one was prepared to pay for a whole hippopotamus, only then to discover that it wasn't edible. So while all the other animals mostly, well, there were some exceptions, tigers and lions, on the whole, didn't want to deal with them, and they didn't like to do primates because the origin of species had just come out then. Darwin
a little too close to us.
Yeah, there were, monkeys were a little too close to man, but everything else was eaten right down to the bone.
Well, as you know, having written extensively about food, there's absolutely nothing in France that doesn't get eaten. And we don't have to go back to zebras and lions and tigers, but you might talk about, another book, you talk about The Perfect Meal, and some of the bizarre things that are incomprehensible, for example, to Americans.
Well, true. Yeah, the Perfect Meal was a great fun. In fact, it won some prizes in America for writing about food and travel. Yes, I decided to go through the whole of France looking for dishes that used to be quite popular or famous, but which are no longer served. And among these were lamprey, which is a kind of eel worm that was a great delicacy. In fact, one king of England ate so many of them that he died of it, a surfeit of lampreys. And then other exotica of various sorts, and culminating in the roasting of an entire ox, which I'd never seen, but I'd read about, and I thought I would really love to be at that. And happily, through a friend who rang me up one night and said, "You still looking for an ox roast?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I found one." I said, "Great." He said, one sort of drawback." He said, "It's now." So we had to get in the car and drive across France to Picardy. But we got there just as they were putting the 500-kilo ox onto the spit. And we watched it being cooked, and then we walked into the tent and ate it with 500 other people. It was spectacular. It was medieval.
I read it and I wanted to go.
Oh,
it really made
it was great.
John, we could sit here and talk for hours, but we only have a limited amount of film in the camera.
Right.
So until next time, thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
My pleasure.
Eating Eternity. You'll gain weight reading it. Thank you.